Good morning. I'm currently in Huntsville, Alabama. You can see the Probst Arena behind me. And I'm here to shed a little light. This video is going to be released in another form on my primary page on Facebook. I'm getting out of Facebook jail at 2 o'clock, I guess, Central, 2 o'clock Central. It's 1 o'clock Mountain. And I can't check into my hotel for an hour after that, though. So here's what I'm going to talk about. The protests were different. It is unconscionable to compare what happened on the 6th of January 2021 in Washington, D.C. with BLM protests and Antifa protests over the summer. When Trump was elected in 2016, I don't know if you remember this, D.C. was on fire. Fire. Not a few broken windows, fire. It looked apocalyptic. A week ago in Portland, they were overcoming the police because they had their grievances. So the death, fire, destruction, and mayhem which were perpetuated by BLM and Antifa, which were, by the way, funded in varying ways through the DNC. Act Blue was an agency that sent money right to BLM. Antifa was paid by Soros. There's a lot of foundations that are incestuous between Soros and BLM and the DNC and Act Blue and all that shenanigans. Those people are now acting as though what we saw in Washington was the biggest blight on the United States ever. Well, I was there, and let me tell you what I saw. Number one, citizens weren't attacking citizens. When it comes to BLM and Antifa, every single time, what happens? Well, you'll have this situation where a bunch of frothing at the mouth mob rioters will use the protest and the mayhem as an excuse to steal. And that's why all the looting happens. That's why all those people just mob a target like a bunch of locusts and leave it looking terrible. You didn't see any of that at any of the Trump, gatherings, demonstrations, whatever you want to call them. You didn't see any of that. There was no looting like that. You didn't see people in the Trump crowd kill guys like David Dorn or burn down ma and pa businesses or bars or anything like that. In fact, I think it's debatable whether or not people who were actually pro-Trump even led the break-in at the Capitol. It was illegal, it was wrong. I condemn that violence just like all the other conservatives. But I think there's a danger here. A lot of the conservatives, by extension, whether they mean to or not, accidentally condemn those who attended the march in D.C. on January 6, 2021. They say they're ashamed and they're sickened, and rightly so. Breaking in was wrong, but they're condemning everybody, and they mischaracterize the event because they're taking out of context the whole thing. Imagine a beautiful girl who's got a mole on one of her boobs, a tiny little mole the size of your fingernail. It's right there on one of her. It's in the movie Vanilla Sky. Remember Vanilla Sky? Tom Cruise looks at Penelope Cruz or whatever. I think it wasn't Selma Hayek. It was a cruise control movie, and he's like, "I'd like to be that mole," and he points at her boob, and she's like, "Oh my goodness!" And you're like, "Well, that was just bad writing all around. I'm surprised they pulled it off, but they did." Well, imagine having a chance to make it with Penelope Cruz, but you see that mole and you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. I can't do the cross-fingered thing when I'm holding the selfie stick. You see what I'm saying? It's ridiculous. Now, I want you to think about numbers because this is the real reason our country was hoodwinked in the first place by coronavirus, is numbers and our lack of ability to understand numbers. Because if we understood numbers, we'd be able to track the deaths from other years month by month and see that coronavirus wasn't having the impact they said. We'd be able to track how influenza and common cold and pneumonia and deaths related to that impact society and the annual numbers. And we'd be able to see, my goodness, my gracious, it looks like 2020 actually is a watershed year in survivability because fewer people overall have died in the year 2020 when compared to 2019, 18, 17, 16. And the preponderance of deaths we saw weren't from coronavirus or violence in general. They were from things like suicide or overdoses, deaths of despair as they're called. And these things were directly facilitated by lockdown measures, which had nothing to do with science and everything to do with politics. Even so, there were fewer deaths. And if we understood the mathematics as a people from the baseline level up. That means you, me on the street, who nobody knows from Adam, all the way up to the halls of Congress. None of this would have happened. There never would have been any lockdown. The lockdown only happened for political reasons. And it was used as an excuse by people in communities across the country to exercise a grip on power, which is, number one, totally uncharacteristic of the American way. Number two, not justified legally. Edicts are not the same as laws on which people who've been appointed vote to ratify them or to throw them out. Number three, there's a psychological component to masking yourself, which is an obedience sort of thing, which is going to have two effects. One, it's going to make certain people act holier than thou against others. Two, it's going to immediately prompt some people to deliberately object. You can't force these things. They have to be optional or not. Number five, I guess, or four, I don't know, I'm losing count, I'm talking, I'm getting distracted by people walking around. But the next thing you've got to consider is this. It is not legal to discriminate based on a health condition. And it's not legal to demand the revelation of a health condition under HIPAA, owing to AIDS, ironically, HIV. If you've got a health condition, an employer cannot preclude you from working there unless, of course, it's something of a contagion or, something like that. I don't even think they can do it at that point, though, because HIV is contagious like that. That's where a lot of the Health Insurance Privacy and Portability Act come from. Privacy and Accountability Act, I'm sorry. There's more to it than that, but the point is you're not compelled to let people know what your health conditions are. Those are a matter of privacy. You have a right to privacy. And it isn't the right of any business to discriminate on someone based on their conditions of health or health conditions. Now, I'm a healthy person, but because I'm a healthy person, I refuse to wear the mask. I haven't worn it the whole trip. I haven't worn it in D.C. or any of the hotels when I checked in or any of the gas stations. I got kicked out of one laundromat in Birmingham. Birmingham is the devil's taint. Let me just tell you that right now. I don't think I ever want to live. I might do some shows down there, but oh my goodness. Oh, it was rough. I was in a hotel. I thought I was in a bad neighborhood until I saw the rest of Birmingham, and I just like, hey, at least my hotel has a brothel in it. Not that I was doing that. It's just you could hear the hookers and the pimps yelling at each other and beating each other up in the adjacent rooms. I mean, they should have made those rooms smoking because at least it would have killed the bed bugs. And your clientele are going to smoke anyway. I mean, if they're going to pay for sex, they're not going to respect your non-smoking rules. So I don't know what that Days Inn was thinking. They ought to condemn it. It's a miracle I made it out with only a few bug bites. But night and day. Night and day, and we were talking about numbers. And what's the deal with numbers? Well, numbers reveal that the COVID-19 shenaniganery was just that. Numbers also reveal that what's being blown out of all proportion by the press as regards the march in Washington, D.C., January 6, 2021, is how many people were there and how many people were jerks. There's only been 82 arrests. Now, I want to do some math with you, so, conk out. In a square mile, you have 5,280 feet multiplied by 5,280 feet. That's why there's a little subscript 2 at the top right. That's 5,280 squared is 1 square mile. When you multiply that out and divide it by 3 square feet, you get 9,500,000 something. I believe I'm off the top of my head here. You can do the math yourself. I just gave you the parameters. So if you were going to fit one person who took up 3 square feet, that meant block, 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 right there. In a square mile, you could fit 9.5 million of them, roughly. Isn't that interesting? From the Washington Monument to the Ellipse is between a quarter mile and half a mile. From the Ellipse to the Capitol is more than a mile. There was a circle of people that was as wide as the Washington Monument to the front of the Ellipse and as wide as one end of the Ellipse all the way down the street over here. Just a swath of people. I don't think it would be inaccurate to say a square mile was filled with people at a saturation of between 3 and 5 square feet. Maybe 3 and 7 square feet if you did it circular and there was a big old fat guy. I don't think that's inaccurate because I got there at 8:30 a.m. I got off the subway. 2 stops after Judiciary stop, or it might have been 1. But I got off the subway and I had to walk about a half a mile to the Ellipse. I thought I'm here at 8:30. The thing doesn't start till 10. I'm more than in enough time. It took me till 9 o'clock to walk to where the ellipse was, maybe 9:30. And when I got there, there were so many people you couldn't move. It would literally take 15, 20 minutes to move 15, 20 feet because you were just like this. And, everybody's kind of getting in there and they're being so polite. It was the most polite people. Oh, I'm sorry, pardon me. And then they'd make a joke. And we all made jokes and we were all happy and we were all enjoying ourselves. And there was fellowship and there were people singing Kumbaya songs and there were people smoking weed. And there was a rainbow flag with a Gadsden stake. That's a gay Gadsden snake, which I don't think a lot of Trump supporters are on that side of the fence, but nobody was hassling the guy. They let him fly his flag. Nobody was hassling the potheads. They let them do their thing. We were all inclusive, and that was our detriment, and it was a problem to a certain extent, because one of the things the media is doing wrong and that mainstream Trumpers do wrong is we accept anybody if they're willing to wear a MAGA hat or say Trump 2020 or something like that, because those buzzwords are shackled with such a reputation because of the mainstream media that to be bold enough to say them in public generally means you stand by your convictions. Simultaneously, that makes it very easy for an infiltrator to pretend they're on your side. Especially when there's a group of 1 million Trump people, it's a lot easier to lie because you're not embarrassing yourself in front of perhaps a paramour of an unrequited kind or something like that. So the other thing I saw, and which was allowed because of our more than tolerant reality as opposed to how we're portrayed in the media as bigoted, prejudiced, racists, that's really the left who's trying to silence us. Parler today is going off. Amazon's deleting Parler. They said, oh, you want your own alternative? Go make your own alternative to Facebook. We did. They're deleting it. This is getting swiftly to the point, we don't want violence, but it's getting swiftly to the point where if something isn't done to preserve greater violence against people, it's something that has to be considered. I don't like that. I hope it doesn't come to that. That's why I'm making this video. That's why I marched on Washington. I don't want violence, and I'm going to get to what happened. So Parler is not allowed right now. Amazon's getting rid of it. It's been kicked off Apple. It's been kicked off everything. The competition's being silenced. This is straight up oligarchy monopoly behavior. That's what it is, pure and simple. So we don't have a solution. And while we were there at the march, let me tell you something. I couldn't do live videos. I did record a bunch of stuff and I uploaded it, but I couldn't do anything live. I couldn't do anything live because the network was oversaturated because there were so many people there. We were talking about numbers. I think there were between 3 million and 10 million people there. The most optimistic estimates I've heard right now from the media are 1.5 million. The mainstream's saying hundreds of thousands. No, it was more than 1 million. I would be more surprised if there were less than 3 million than if there were as many as 10 million, given my experience and how many hours it took. I mean, we're talking, I had to go to the bathroom. I was in line for literally an hour to a porta potty where it looked like somebody went in there made out of refried beans and exploded. It was terrible. See, we were very, very accommodating. There were Vietnamese flags there, which were being flown to show the solidarity of foreign people for Donald Trump and this administration, owing to how it's cracking down and going against totalitarian fascist regimes the world over. We were very, very, very open-minded. And of course, you're going to have a few radical backwoods type fellas. They're there, sadly. That's how reality is. So we saw those guys. And they were kind of isolated and walked around yelling stuff, and we let them be. Turned out some of those were Antifa. I didn't know. I thought they were just boogaloo boys who were gauche and a minority and not to be humored. And so I just ignored them and let them do their thing like I did other political parties that I wasn't too interested in. I didn't realize what we were seeing. I should have. A night before, when Alex Jones and Roger Stone and Ali Alexander spoke at, I believe it was Liberty Plaza or Freedom Plaza, there were about 5,000 patriots there, maybe more. And I saw a guy who said he was a hippie for Trump. And he looked Antifa as hell. But he was in Trump gear. And I'm like, who's this guy? And he was talking about how, yeah, well, we were hippies for Trump. And they said we was Proud Boys and pulled our bus over. But man, we're just hippies for Trump. And I'm sitting here thinking, maybe, all right, well, you do your thing. When I got off the subway, this time I know I was at Judiciary Station on January 5th, 2021. I got off, and the cops had surrounded everything so that you couldn't park anywhere within a mile. That's one of the reasons I was taking the subway in. I'd walk a mile happily, but you couldn't. DC was empty. Everything was boarded up. As I come out of Judiciary Station, I hear, like Godzilla footsteps in the distance, the dulcet tones of Alex Jones reverberating through the streets in Washington, D.C. It was wonderful. I tell you what, it felt great. It felt great. It's not my best Alex Jones I've been talking about. But I walked up, and as I'm walking up, there is an empty street. I'm the only one walking down it. And I see two guys on those bicycles that only have one gear. You know what I'm talking about? And they're riding them in hoodies. And they're saying, pardon my French, fuck Antifa, fuck it. And there was nobody there. And they weren't dressed like Trumpers. Who were they saying that to? I thought, that's curious, because that's not how I am. Even the most radical pro-Trump people I know aren't that way. I thought, well, maybe they're just, I'm coming from the middle of the country. This is the east of the country. I watched the Alex Jones event. The next day, I'm walking around and I see these people in military getup. And I was like, oh, maybe they're Army. I don't know. I didn't see a lot of them. I did see a few. And I heard in one of the videos on my YouTube page, the one with the cowboy hat in the foreground, I heard somebody, when we were talking about Congress, say, put a bag over the head and suffocate them to death. Not something I advocate for, or any of the people singing Kumbaya and being there peaceful advocated for. There was cheering at the front for something Trump said, but nobody around us made a sound. Everybody was kind of like, who the heck is this? It's just kind of, but you couldn't go anywhere because there were millions of people there. When I was there, I thought the news was going to be that people climbed in the streets because there were so many of them there. Because they did, or climbed in the trees rather, because there were so many of them there. You'd find like, in a tree like the one behind me over here, you'd see like 10 people in that tree, I kid you not. And they were climbing on top of the porta potties because there was nowhere to go and nothing to see. So you'd climb over stuff. I mean, you couldn't sit on the curb. You'd be walking and you'd find yourself in mud suddenly because the street and the pavement you were on disappeared and you didn't know it because there were so many people, there was no way to tell. It was literally a sea of people. It was like being in a ball pit, but they were people. You know what I mean? It was packed in like that. So we were talking about numbers earlier. Now, how many thousands are there in a million? Well, it's 1,000. So 100,000 times 10 is a million. That's 999,000. One more makes a million. How many thousands are there in 10 million? Well, that's 10,000 thousands is 10 million. 1,000, 10,000 times is 10 million. Okay? Now, what's 1% of 100? It's 1. What's 1% of 1,000? It's 10. What's 1% of 10,000? Wait a second. I think I might have done that wrong. No, that's right. 1% of 100 is 1. 1% of 1,000 is 10. 1% of 100,000 is 100. Okay? That means it takes 1,000 before you're at 1% of a million. It takes 10,000 before you're at 1% of 10 million. Now, there were 82 arrests made at the Capitol. I was there. This was done. These people were in trouble way before I got there. I left before Trump was finished speaking. And by the time I got to the Capitol, I thought there was an event there because it was overrun, but only 82 people were arrested inside the Capitol itself. 82 out of between 1 and 10 million. So let's say it's 1 million. What percentage is 82 out of 1 million? Well, 100 would be 0.01%, because 1,000 times 1,000 is a million, right? So 82 would be less than 10% of 1,000. 82 is such an infinitesimal number when compared to a minimum of 1 million people, probably 3 to 10 million. If you exacerbate that out to 1,000, 1,000 is 0.01% of a million. 10,000 is 1%. 10,000 times 100 would be a million. So, less than 0.01% of 1.5 million people actually did something that conservatives really hate. And yet, 75 million conservatives who voted for Donald Trump are being blamed for it. At the rally itself, if you divided it into the topographical surface area of a human body, the amount of people that are being used to define the entire body of those who marched is less than that mole on Penelope Cruz's bust in Vanilla Sky. It's much less than that. And the media is telling us to throw out Penelope Cruz because of that. Throw out Penelope Cruz. You can't make a wife out of her. She got a mole on her titty. Throw that bitch out. Pardon my French. I'm sorry. I'm trying to give you an illustration here of how ridiculous this is. It's the conservatives on the right and the commies on the left. They're both selling us a narrative. And unfortunately, some of the conservatives aren't there for the truth. They're there for the political position, and that's very sad. But they need to quit castigating everyone for the actions of a few. Now, in what I've said, I'm assuming that the few who breached the perimeter of the Capitol building itself and were arrested, I'm assuming those were pro-Trump supporters. There's ample evidence they weren't. There was one guy, he had long hair and a big old beard, and he had a hammer and sickle on his hand. Was it his right hand or his left hand? I think it was his left hand, actually, because he's facing. He's got a hammer and sickle on there. There was a black dude who had a rope in his backpack that was arrested. There were a couple other guys, and I saw the instances. There's two other instances. I saw a fat little toady dude with those evil Crowley-looking eyes that have that sort of evil glee in them, you know. He threw a frozen water bottle at a Trump supporter who was like in their 60s. And the guy's like, "Where did that come from?" And I was like, "Right there." I pointed at him, and I kept walking because I was looking for a bathroom. And then I saw a skinny dude bedecked in camouflage and knee pads and all that stuff saying, "You came all this way. Are you not going to finish it?" He was trying to rabble-rouse. But everybody just ignored these people because they were mostly grandmas and families. I saw no less than 20 dogs. One was a stroller that had two dogs in it. One was a lady carrying her dog. There was a dog on a leash at one point, but that was pretty crazy. I felt for the owner and the dog. I saw a child in a stroller one time, which was also crazy because it was a line of people. About 20 people were coming through, and one of them had a baby in a stroller. They were right in the middle, and they had to do it that way because there were so many people. You couldn't see the paths of the little eddies of people flowing through. It was that packed. I can't believe they brought a baby, but that's who they brought. We're talking grandmas, aunts, uncles, mothers, fathers, children. We're not talking military-age men. But here's something interesting. Here's something really, really interesting that you need to think about. And I've been talking about this a lot because I need to. Because, number one, I back Donald Trump. I think there's a very real chance he still remains in office on January 20th. And I'm not going to give up until January 20th. I'm not. I have faith in what the Lord's told his saints. And maybe they're wrong. Maybe they've heard wrong. But though he slay me, yet will I serve him. That's what it says in Scripture. And what the media is doing right now is demonizing everybody who follows Trump and who follows Jesus. Jesus first, country second, administration leading the country after family, actually. So it's Jesus, family, country, administration. I'm just saying the things. I'm not getting them in order. Don't get all panty twisted on me. But when I was there that day and Donald Trump spoke, he didn't get on until about 11:40. He was supposed to get on at 11. We expected the speakers to start at 10. They did. We expected him at 11. It was 42 degrees. It was freezing. Today it's supposed to be 37 right now in Huntsville, but the sun's out. There wasn't sun then, and it was raining and spitfiring a little bit. Everybody was cold, and it was miserable. It was so miserable. But we watched, and we joked, and we had high spirits, and we had to wait for Donald Trump for 40 minutes. And finally, he got on, and I was cold by this time. This is a historical moment. I wanted to stay through the whole thing, but I was cold. And about 30 to 40 minutes into his speech, he started breaking down the numbers like you heard me do earlier. And you know what? People get tired of that. I got tired of it. Sorry about that, y'all. I was like, all right, well, I'm going to walk now. Because about a half hour into his speech, he said, at the end of this speech, we're going to peacefully march on the Capitol. And he was going to address us there once we got there. We were going to go to the east side, the front side, not the west side, the back side. Well, 30 to 40 minutes in, I got tired. I've been talking 24 minutes at this point. I'll bet you're tired too. Well, I did. I decided I'm gonna try and beat the crowd over there. Maybe I can find a restroom before they do. I made it to the Capitol at 1:30, by 1:31 p.m., probably closer to 1:21, 1:15, because it was over a mile walk, and you couldn't walk fast. But we had a pretty good pace going on. I'd say there were about 9 square feet per person, and they were stretched all the way across a 200 feet swath on one street and across a 100 feet swath on another street that came together into a point right before there's a street that takes a right, and it takes you right around the Capitol. But we were going just straight. You didn't worry about streets because there were so many people it didn't matter. And I talked with a veteran while I went there, And if Trump got on at 11:40 and I listened for 30 to 40 minutes, that puts me leaving at 12:10 to 12:20. Earliest I could have arrived is 1:15 at the Capitol. So that means 55 to an hour and 5 minutes it took me to get there. And then my video was taken after I'd been there about 10 minutes looking around, I guess. Maybe even later than that. So it took me a full hour to walk. And I left before Trump was done. When I got to the Capitol, it was overrun. I didn't even know violence took place because there were people all the way up to the Capitol. And it was just like everywhere else, a swath of people, hundreds of thousands. I think 30, 50,000, I think that's short. I think we're talking hundreds of thousands of people, like bees. It was ridiculous. All up and down that, bees or ants or sheep or something. And nobody was rushing, nobody was screaming. You had some impassioned talking, but it wasn't, there were a few chants that broke out on the way there, but it was just kind of chaos there, but it wasn't frantic. I was still looking for a bathroom the whole time, and I heard flashbang grenades go off, and I thought those flashbang grenades were fireworks, and they weren't. But I didn't see them. I just heard them. I was looking for the firework. But it was cloudy, and it was cold, and my brain probably wasn't working right. So finally I see, well, everybody's at the Capitol. Looks like they're giving tours or something. I don't know. Is this where Congress is at? I don't know. I didn't know these things. All right, I'm out of here. That's what pretty much everybody did. Most people didn't even realize violent things had happened at the Capitol until the news started telling us about it. You know why? Because say you're Penelope Cruz and you got a mole on your left butt cheek. You probably aren't going to know about it unless somebody tells you about it. That's the situation. The vast majority of the body of supporters of Trump were not there to be violent, and we're not violent. We're talking more than 99.99%. That's a lot. But the media's spinning it out of control. I saw some black commentators say the only reason you got 30 to 50,000 people up there is because they were white. Well, number one, a white girl by the name of Ashley Babbitt was killed by the cops. She didn't have any weapons. She was pulling herself through a window. She got killed. I think it might have been a rubber bullet that exploded. It doesn't matter. They didn't need to use that force on a little girl, even if she was in the Air Force, for goodness sake. So that's not true what that commentator said. Number two, all summer, BLM and Antifa, which were primarily ethnic, marched around burning down cities, looting and rioting. They attacked other citizens. They didn't address their grievances to the government that had wronged them. They addressed their grievances to anybody they perceived as having a different opinion ideologically than they did. And they killed some of them. And they burnt down cities. And they sought to kill others who had to defend themselves across the country. And it's still going on in places like Portland, nationwide, while the media, flames licking the sky behind them, call the goings-on mostly peaceful. I call that mostly bullshit. Pardon my French, we did chant that at the rally. We chanted that at the rally because it was true. Our election was stolen from us. These protests were not mostly peaceful. COVID-19 is a fraud the numbers disprove. And so is the idea that more than 1 million people became violent in Washington, D.C. A fraction of that number did, and they were very likely not Trump supporters. I have given you 4 separate instances, 5 when I think about the hippie, who very well were Antifa in disguise. Wolves in sheep's clothing, a saying I might add that goes back over 2,000 years. You see, it would be more unlikely for there to have been no Antifa presence, whatever, than that we should have seen agent provocateurs perpetuate some sort of false flag. That would be more unlikely than what we did see. Again, the numbers reveal this trend, and they've done it before. In Michigan, Antifa posing as Trump supporters attempted to take hostage the governor. Here's something else interesting that happened in Michigan. In 2011, their capital was seized for 55 days. And nobody said anything about that, like what they're saying now. Because it's all staged. We are in the middle of a Pravda narrative. Only the Soviet Union has become the Stars and Stripes. And if we don't fight against it, we lose the Stars and Stripes. And that's why, if Biden makes it in, I wouldn't even fight social media if you're a patriot. I'd just delete it, find people, get outside of the technology, confederate together locally, tell the truth, be prepared. Because if they do push through Biden on the 20th, which I still don't think they will, but if they do, then if we don't fight, the blood of people will be on our hands. the whole country. More people are going to die under Biden than they would in a very terrible civil war through sheer inept bureaucratic mistake. Stalin killed more people with the swash of his pen than Hitler ever did. Same with Mao. So, if you care, if you know what's happened is terrible, tell the truth. Talk to God every day. We want to avoid violence if at all possible. We have taken every effort to legally redress our grievances with the government using the apparatus available to us, and we have been stymied by false flag propaganda, outright lies, deceptions, operations, propaganda campaigns, brainwashing, social Marxism, and ideological subversion at every step of the way. Eventually, it comes to a point where it is folly to try and rely upon the edifice we have constructed for social functionality. That edifice is dead. At that point, we do have to rise up, and I don't want that. I really don't want that. But we tell the truth. We let politicians know we're the ones they need to be wary of. That we, the people, are the ones with the power, not they, the checkbook. We can save this country. So don't go condemning Trumpers because of the actions of either a few or agent provocateurs, either of which doesn't besmirch the whole